The text came through on a Tuesday morning while I was making coffee. We need to discuss rent for the apartment. Family property or not, you're living here rent-free while your father-in-law and I are still paying the mortgage. $1,500 a month, starting next month. I read it 3 times. The kitchen suddenly felt very small. I remember the exact sound my coffee mug made when I set it down. A soft clink against granite that felt too loud, too final. Outside the window it was already hot. One of those humid days where the air feels like it's pressing against the glass. She'd never mentioned this before. Not once in the 2 years my husband and I had been living here. Not when we moved in. Not through the holidays, the family dinners, the weekends watching their grandchildren learn to walk on the living room carpet. I stood there with my hand still on the mug, reading the message again, trying to understand if I was missing something obvious. The gap between what I'd believed about our living situation and what I was being told had suddenly become a chasm, and I realized in that moment that I had no idea what this was actually about, or how long she'd been thinking it. Let me step back because this didn't happen in a vacuum. When we first got married 3 years ago, my husband's parents offered us their apartment. They'd bought a second property upstate and wanted someone trustworthy to live there, maintain it, be a presence in the home while they split time between 2 places. My husband's 2 sisters had already moved out of state. Their oldest son was deployed. We were the closest family option. Felt like a generous offer. It was generous. We were grateful. But there was always this underlying current. Not cruelty exactly. Something more like calculated kindness. The kind where you're aware at every moment that you're benefiting from someone's decision, and that same someone could change their mind. You're so lucky to have this opportunity, my mother-in-law would say. Not just once. Every time we saw her. Do you know how hard we worked to afford this? You two have no idea what real responsibility looks like. I never said anything. My husband would shift in his seat, uncomfortable, but he wouldn't push back either. There were little things. She started using the key we'd given her more frequently. Not emergencies, maintenance things she could have called about first. Watering plants when the building had a sprinkler system. Rearranging our kitchen cabinets to better use the space. Once, she came while we were at work and reorganized the bedroom closet without mentioning it beforehand. When I brought it up to my husband, he said I was being ungrateful. She's just trying to help. You're too sensitive about your space. I wasn't. But I didn't argue. The comments intensified. Every dinner, some version of the same theme. This is such a beautiful place. We could be renting this out, you know? Plenty of people would pay premium prices for this location. I was talking to Janet, from book club. And she pays $2,200 for a 1-bedroom in this neighborhood. Of course, they actually maintain their building. We're not getting younger, and real estate doesn't maintain itself. Especially when people don't seem to understand. She never finished that sentence. She didn't need to. Then there was the incident with the repairs. Our bathroom faucet started leaking about 6 months before the rent demand. Just a drip, but clearly a small problem that could become a big one. I mentioned it to my husband, who said he'd text his dad about a plumber. His mother intercepted the conversation. I'll handle this. It's our property. You shouldn't have to worry about it. That made sense. Owners typically handle major maintenance. She hired someone, a contractor she knew. The bill was $600. It turned out the problem wasn't just the faucet. There was some kind of valve issue behind the wall. A legitimate repair, legitimately expensive. When I saw the invoice, I felt something shift. My mother-in-law mentioned it twice over the next month. The things we invest in for that apartment. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it. Your father-in-law and I were talking. If we're going to be responsible for everything, we should probably be compensated accordingly. I remember thinking, compensated? We didn't ask her to hire someone. We didn't ask for that repair to happen on that timeline. But I didn't say it. My husband's response was always the same. She has a point. We are living there pretty cheaply. I understood the logic. I just didn't understand why it felt increasingly like we owed a debt we never promised to incur. 3 months before the rent demand, there was a conversation I wasn't part of. My husband mentioned it casually. Too casually. Mom asked me today if I had any interest in actually buying the place someday. She said Dad's been thinking about whether they want to sell it to family or put it on the market in a few years. I remember the exact phrase I used. What did you tell her? I said maybe. That we'd have to talk about it. We didn't talk about it. Not really. The conversation drifted away, and I assumed it had died. Then came the text. That Tuesday morning text that asked for $1,500 a month for living in what she'd suddenly decided to call family property rather than our investment. I didn't respond immediately. I called my husband at work. Did you know about this? No. She said she wanted to discuss family finances with me separately first, but then she just did this. His voice had that quality it gets when he's caught between his mother and his wife. A tightness. Like he's bracing for impact. I asked the question that had been forming in my mind since the text arrived. Is she trying to force us out? He didn't answer right away. I don't think so. I think she thinks she's being fair. That's what made it worse. It wasn't strategic cruelty. It was something more insidious. She genuinely believed she was right. I spent the next week doing what anxious people do. I researched. I looked up mortgage rates from 3 years ago. I calculated what the mortgage payment probably was on a property of that size in that neighborhood. I found comparable apartments being rented for $1,800 to $2,300. So technically, $1,500 was below market rate. That made it harder to argue against. It made it feel like I had no right to complain. But it also clarified something essential. She had moved the goalposts and she had moved them unilaterally. We'd been living there on the understanding that we were staying for free in exchange for maintaining the property and serving as a presence. A young family with a stake in the building's well-being. That was the implicit contract. She'd decided, without consulting us, that the contract had changed. I found out the following week that she'd made a comment to my husband's sister. They needed to understand that nothing in life is free. They're young. They need to learn responsibility. This was coming from a woman who'd helped her own mother pay for her first house, who had never paid a day of rent in her life until she married my father-in-law. But my sister-in-law told my husband, who told me in the way information travels in families, with apology and reluctance like he was delivering bad news. That's when I understood. It wasn't about the money. It was about power. About reminding us that the roof over our heads was a gift that could be revoked. About shifting the dynamic so we were now debtors instead of trusted stewards. And the worst part, she believed her own narrative about it. I called her the following Sunday. My husband sat on the couch, reading the same page of his book he'd been reading for 20 minutes. We both knew what was about to happen. I got your text about the rent, I said. We need to talk about it. Of course. I'm glad you're taking it seriously. Taking it seriously. As if there was something not serious about questioning her unilateral demand. What changed? I asked. 3 weeks ago, you were telling us how lucky we were. Last month, you were talking about eventually selling to us. And then suddenly, we're supposed to start paying rent on an apartment you told us we could live in. Nothing changed, she said. The tone was reasonable, which somehow made it worse. I've been thinking about it for months. Your father-in-law and I have expenses we didn't anticipate. Insurance premiums went up. There's talk about property taxes increasing in the neighborhood. We can't absorb the cost anymore. None of that was my problem. That's what I wanted to say. Instead I said, you didn't talk to us. You didn't ask if we could afford it. You just declared it. Would you have said yes if I'd asked? There it was. The trap revealed. If we'd said no, we'd have looked ungrateful. If we'd said yes, we'd have been accepting an obligation we hadn't agreed to. By doing it unilaterally, she'd taken the decision out of our hands entirely. What I would have appreciated, I said slowly, is being treated like adults. Like partners in this, Not like children you're testing to see if we'll obey. That's not what this is about, isn't it? My voice was steady, but I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. You have the key to our apartment. You come in whenever you want. You rearranged our bedroom without asking. You've commented for months about what a burden we are. And now this. It feels like a message. You're reading too much into it. I don't think I am. There was a long silence. I could hear her breathing on the other end. We're your family, I said. If you wanted us to contribute toward costs, you could have asked. We would have had a conversation. We could have figured something out together. But this feels like you're punishing us for needing something from you. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm being realistic about our financial situation. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her why, if finances were tight, she'd hired a $600 contractor without mentioning it to us first. Why they just returned from a 2-week vacation. Why financial responsibility apparently only applied to us. But I didn't. Instead I said, we can't do this. We can't live somewhere and pretend we have a home when really we're just month-to-month tenants paying a debt that keeps growing. That's not fair to us, and I don't think it's fair to your son. So what are you saying? I'm saying we need to move. This doesn't work anymore. As soon as I said it, I knew it was the right thing. Also the hardest thing. Also the thing that would create a rift that might never fully close. My husband's head came up from his book. By the end of the month, I continued, we'll find somewhere else. You don't have to do that. We can work something out. No, I said. We can't. Not like this. If you change how you want to do this, if you actually want to talk to us like we're family, then maybe. But not under these terms. I hung up. My husband stared at me. Do you realize what you just did? I realized. I just committed us to finding a new apartment in a city with no affordable rentals. I just created a situation where his mother would blame me, permanently, for breaking the family arrangement. I just chosen my dignity over comfort, and I had no idea if it was actually the right choice. I do, I said. And I'm sorry. But I'm not sorry we're doing it. He didn't argue. That surprised me. He just nodded slowly, set down his book and said, okay. Let's start looking tomorrow. Finding an apartment cost us $4,800 in application fees, security deposits, and the premium we had to pay to break a lease on a place we'd booked for 6 months before backing out. It cost us space. We downsized from a 2-bedroom to a 1-bedroom that feels half the size. It cost us about 40 minutes each way on my husband's commute, but it didn't cost as much as staying would have. The first week in the new place, my mother-in-law sent a message asking to set up a family meeting to discuss boundaries. My husband scheduled it reluctantly. Never happened. She rescheduled twice, then let it die. My husband's father called once. He sounded uncomfortable. Your mother's really upset, he said. I know. She feels like you disrespected her. I let that sit for a moment. She disrespected us first. She just did it so politely that nobody noticed. He didn't have an answer to that. For about 2 months there was a cold period. Holiday texts but no phone calls. Invitations declined with vague excuses. My husband was miserable. He'd call his sisters trying to understand what he'd done wrong. When the answer was that he'd sided with his wife instead of defending his mother's boundary violations. Then this was the strange part, something shifted. My mother-in-law texted my husband asking if he wanted to help her move some furniture at the apartment. Not because they needed help. Because she was reaching out. He went. They talked. He came back and told me she'd said, I think maybe I was stressed about money and took it out on you guys. That wasn't okay. Not a full apology. Not an acknowledgement of the real problem. But a crack in the wall. 6 months later we had them over to see the new place. It's small. Our kitchen table is 12 inches from our couch. The water pressure is inconsistent, and the radiator clanks at 3 in the morning. It's ours. We signed the lease. We pay the rent. And nobody has a key but us. My mother-in-law walked around awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable in the space. It's very cozy, she said. But the next week she sent my husband a recipe his grandmother used to make with a note. Thought you might enjoy making this in the new place. It wasn't reconciliation. It was the smallest possible extension of an olive branch. What I learned, and what took me months to articulate, is that she wasn't a bad person. She wasn't being deliberately cruel. She was anxious about money. She was aging and felt the weight of responsibility. And instead of managing those feelings like an adult, she'd expressed them through control. The tragic part is that I could understand all of that and still need to leave. You can be sympathetic to someone's circumstances and still not accept being mistreated because of them. Last week I was folding laundry in our tiny bedroom, the radiator clanking, the neighbor's television audible through the wall, and my husband came in and told me his mother had asked if we wanted to come to dinner next month. Just dinner. Normal family dinner. Are you going to say yes? I asked. I think so. Are you? I thought about the apartment, about the key she no longer had, about the fact that the most valuable thing we'd gotten from this situation wasn't the resolution, because there wasn't really one. It was clarity. I said, yeah, I'll go. But something fundamental had changed for me. I'd learned that loving someone and maintaining boundaries with them aren't opposing forces. They're both necessary. I think a lot of people experience versions of this. Not always with family property. Sometimes with borrowed money that becomes a mysterious debt. Sometimes with help that comes with permanent strings attached. Sometimes with people who teach you through their actions that nothing is ever truly given to you. It's all just on loan, revocable the moment you fail to show proper gratitude. If that's resonated with you, if you know what it feels like to receive something generous and then slowly understand that the generosity comes with a price tag that keeps growing, I want you to know the price of your dignity is not negotiable. Sometimes the only way to reclaim it is to walk away from the gift entirely. And that's not ingratitude. That's self-respect. And the strange thing is, people often respect you more for it. Even if it takes them a while to admit it.